Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Andrew Forsthoefel is a writer, speaker, and peace activist living in Maine. After graduating from Middlebury College, he was ready to begin his adult life, but didn't know how. So he decided to take a cross-country quest for guidance, in which everyone he met would be his guide. After his year-long walk across America, Andrew began telling his stories from his transformative journey. He co-produced a radio documentary about this project that was featured on This American Life. His book, Walking to Listen, goes deeper into his stories and explores the practice and philosophy of walking to listen. He is a traveling teacher, offering walks and workshops that train participants in the work of becoming a trustworthy listener. His work is a contribution to the collective project of learning how to be alive together with love by listening, united by our diversity, empowered by sharing the unavoidable vulnerability of being human, and freed by opening up to ourselves and one another. Andrew, what a pleasure it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you, Casey. So great to be here with you.
I'm so glad I asked before we got started how to pronounce your last name. You gave me really great mnemonic advice, Forsthoefel. That's really good. I would have totally butchered it without that, so thanks for clarifying. Well, I am so super excited to have you on. When I came across your story, I knew that I wanted to learn what you have gone through. It's a really interesting story from what I can tell, but I was so curious about it that I forced myself not to get too much into your story and do too much research ahead of time. I basically have listened to part of one of your TED Talks. I have read the back cover of your book, and I am just very excited to hear your story along with the listener today. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, man. So happy to be here. And, I've gotten to share a good bit about it, and it's always a gift to come back to this experience and talk about it, to see how it's continuing to live in me and shape me, which I get to find out when I get to talk about it. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Man, that's learning. So cool. So cool. I love that. What a great perspective. I want to set this up by talking about your life. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and kind of what the growing up experience was like for you.
Sure. Yeah. I was born and raised for the first about 10 years of my life in Chicago, Illinois. And then we lived for a year in India, where my parents were doing some work and study. Wow. And we then eventually moved to Pennsylvania, a number of different cities there. And my parents divorced when I was 15. And so I would say that the experience of a certain kind of certainly not homelessness, but never experiencing what it was like to be in a single place and in a single community for an extended period of time. That experience of belonging as a question rather than as a certainty for me sort of defined my childhood and my adolescence, because I wasn't sure where I belonged. I wasn't conscious of the fact that I wasn't sure of that, but what was constant was my family. And then when my family went through the divorce, there was just this total disorientation and ungrounding that created a massive space in me for the deeper existential questions that we are all getting to live and experience to varying degrees of awareness. Those came flooding in. So I didn't know what was real. I didn't know what was trustworthy. I didn't know where I belonged. I didn't know much. And I was full of pain to be going through this profound initiation of my parents' divorce, initiation into my human vulnerability. And it wasn't until I graduated from college 8 years later that I was able to take the time to begin integrating those childhood and adolescent experiences in the form of this walk. So I took a walk. When I graduated from school, I had so many. The feeling was, okay, I just completed my culture's rite of passage, and yet I still don't feel like an adult. And so in the absence of a cultural rite of passage that feels legitimate and respectable, not that going to college isn't legitimate and respectable. It's just that my soul and my spirit were left somewhat untended to in college. In my heart, like these sort of more human aspects of myself were sort of incidental to my education, my formal education. And that to me felt problematic. And so when I finally graduated, it's like, well, who is this heart? Who is this spirit? And what is it for me to be a man and to be an adult and to be Andrew? And so the best way I could think to begin exploring that question and integrating my past traumas was to take this walk in which I determined to see everybody as my teacher. And so I wanted to stay on the roads and not on the trails, and just really show up fully to the present moment, not as if the present moment is a means to some end, or as if like, okay, I need to like check this box of this present moment to get to like the next one, but rather to really be in this present moment and to see whoever it was I happened to meet in that moment as sacred, as my teacher, as worthy of spending my life force in listening to, and
Wow.
so it became a year-long apprenticeship on the road, walking to listen.
Wow, that's really amazing. It's funny. We live in a culture that really doesn't have a lot of rites of passage. You mentioned college being one, which certainly I would consider that a rite of passage. But what did you study? What did you know kind of what you wanted to do professionally?
I wasn't sure what I wanted to do professionally, and I studied environmental studies with a focus in nonfiction writing. And yeah, I minored in Chinese, and was never quite sure, but it was the writing that really turned me on in school.
Yeah, gotcha. Wow. So, when did you start to formulate this idea? Like, were you starting to think about this as you were in college, or is it something that hit you later? Is it something that you had this idea and it was just that's what you were going to do? Like, how much thought went into the process of doing this walk?
There was a good amount of planning, and then an even greater amount of serendipity and synchronicity. So the way it went down was my senior year, I applied for it's called a Watson Fellowship, and they give you $25,000 or something like that to spend a year exploring a project of your own design somewhere abroad. And so I got really excited about this as a potential first step out of school. And got really into my project proposal, which was going to be an exploration of how 3 different indigenous communities that I had made contact with initiate their young people into adulthood, because that was relevant to my experience at the time. I was supposedly an adult now, but had all these questions about what that actually meant after the rite of passage that I went through. And so I figured I would do sort of a comparative study, and make contact with people who were living in a different culture and a different paradigm than the one I had been born into, and perhaps would learn something from that experience. And did not end up getting the fellowship and was devastated about that. But then began thinking, well, it was never about the fellowship itself. It was about what the fellowship inspired me to begin creating for myself. And so I decided I would do that project anyways, and would get a job on a fishing boat to make a bunch of money as fast as I could out of school, and then finance it myself. And long story short, and you'll have to read the book, I got this job on a lobster boat, and after 3 months I was fired and didn't have the funds I was planning on having, and was also suddenly on a different timetable. And but the urgency of the project, the urgency of my questions was high, and I didn't feel like I could just flounder about and wait for something to happen. It was like the baby's coming now, the birth is happening now, so what's it going to be? And I'd heard of people walking across America, and it just began to seem to me that that this could be a way totally different form for my project, but it could, the form could still serve my impulses. And so I thought, wow, maybe I could stay in my own country and look to my own people to sort of share with me their experiences of life. And maybe there will be something here for me in terms of coming of age. And so that's how the project came to be. From the moment I was fired from the lobster boat to the moment I set out to walk was 6 weeks. So
Wow.
in some respects, it happened really quickly, and there actually wasn't a whole lot of cognitive process behind it. But in another sense, I'd been planning this for more than a year, as I went through my senior year.
Wow. How does one get fired from a lobster boat?
You'll have to read the book.
Perfect. Good tease. I love it. Okay. So you're underfunded when you get started. What things do you bring with you?
I had kind of just the basic necessities that you'd need for sort of a weekend camping trip. I wasn't planning on going into the wilderness. My hope was to stay on the public roads, to make myself available to as wide a diversity of people as possible, figuring that folks who are on trails are sort of a fairly specific demographic, and so wanted to expand that demographic of contact, and therefore didn't need much gear, specialized gear. And so all I had was a backpack and sleeping bag, sleeping pad. Let's see, I had an audio recorder that I would record audio interviews with. I always kept a food bag, just basic food. But I was on the roads, and so there are some significant stretches of remote land that our roads cut through. But I was always passing gas stations, and never in isolation, other than the isolation any of us can experience in our own mind.
Yeah.
So
wow. And your route wasn't directly linear, right? You left from Pennsylvania, but didn't walk in a straight line per se. You were kind of going through lots of different pockets of the country. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I walked out my mom's back door outside Philadelphia and went down to New Orleans. That took about 3 or 4 months. And then from there I went northwest, and another 6 months or so, 6-7 months later, I was in San Francisco. Half Moon Bay is where I finished.
Wow, that's crazy. So as you left the house on those first days, did you already start meeting different people, or was it something that you kind of had to get going and get into the momentum of before you started, learning from other people out there?
Yeah, I mean, what I began to find right away is that I hadn't realized it, but my entire life I had been seeing through a particular lens, a lens that was sort of defined by the busyness addiction that most of us in this culture have, and the urgency, the belief in urgency, and all kinds of beliefs that prevented me from slowing down enough to actually be with somebody. And so when I took that lens off, that's not intrinsically true. That's just like one way of perceiving the world, perceiving the moment. And so when I put on this other lens of all I have to do right now is be here with you. That is my job. That's a worthy endeavor to invest my energy in. That's all there is to be here with you, and to see you as worthy of that, and to experience our connection as worthy of tending, and of actually getting into the the dance of making relationship, of getting to know who you are, and what is it that you're living that if I don't know about, I'm living in ignorance. You are living something, are embodying something, are carrying something that is a unique little pocket of this ocean of reality, of human experience. And if I don't know the little pocket of you, then there's a little pocket of this ocean that I'm unfamiliar with. There's a little pocket of ignorance in me about who I am as an interconnected member of this universe, of this ocean. And so this lens, what I call trustworthy listening, this lens of just presence, was one I was kind of unfamiliar with. But when I first began putting it on, and with the help of this project, Walking to Listen, I found that immediately it began to open up extraordinary connections on the very first day. And again, I'll have to direct you to the book. There are just some truly incredible stories that started to happen the very first day with my willingness to put myself out there and humble myself and make myself vulnerable in the ways that I was doing on this project, and with people's courage to entrust themselves to the moment as well with me. And so with those two, when two willingnesses meet, this extraordinary, I would almost call them miracles, can take place. You know, like there are so many stories from this year that happened with people who didn't share identity groups with me, who were very different from me in many ways: spiritual, religious, political, racial, cultural. You know, and with a willingness to listen. It's just incredible what that passport, like what regions of experience, what realms of human interconnection, the passport of a willingness to listen can get you into.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. If you get trapped in the silo of social media, you kind of feel like the divide between all of us is growing further and further apart. But I still believe that we all have more in common than we do have, differences. Do you agree with that after your experience?
I think I would say, I don't think our differences and our similarities are separate. Number one, like I don't think they're different. I don't think they're separate things. And I would say that rather than, I would say that, like, even if it were true that we have more differences than similarities, that doesn't change the fact that we're still living here on this earth together, interdependent upon one another. And so regardless of how different we are, we're in this thing together. And therefore it's imperative that I learn how to be in a relationship with you, no matter how different you are from me. And I stand to benefit. This is the heartbreaking thing for me after experiencing this year, is like seeing all this infighting in our country, and the ways that our historical trauma keeps us separate from each other, our personal trauma and our collective trauma, seeing the ways that this keeps us from meeting ourselves and then one another. We miss out on this unspeakably precious opportunity to get to know each other and to get to know ourselves in the presence of each other. And so it's almost like, yeah, like, I'm not like, please be different from me, like be as different as you can possibly be. Like, be you, be all of who you are. And I don't need you to be similar to me in order for us to have a meaningful and authentic relationship. And in some ways, much like biodiversity, our identity diversity is really important for health. For the health of a culture, for us to have different personalities and different ideas, and so believing that sort of, homogeneity is what needs to be present in order for us to feel safe with one another is just a recipe for stagnation and just a lost opportunity, I think. So, but I do, I mean, I think I hear what you're saying. We're in the end, we're all human, and there are these unifying characteristics of the human experience, such as vulnerability. Regardless of how much privilege you have in the political realm, you have a body which is vulnerable to sickness and injury and death, and you have a mind which is vulnerable to believing illusions and delusions, and you have a heart which is vulnerable to being broken open by your love. And we all carry this, no matter how differently. And so yeah, I definitely agree with you that this sort of foundational human, this like common denominator of our humanity expresses itself in all these diversities that really serve the health of our ecosystem, I think.
Wow. That was a very well thought answer. I really appreciate that. Do you have any story where that was particularly true for you? You maybe met somebody that in the beginning you maybe had doubts that you wouldn't have a lot of common ground with them, but through, listening and having conversations that you were able to bond in it in a way that surprised you?
Sure. Yeah. Lots. One that comes to mind was when I got to Arizona. I had a choice to either walk on the interstate I-40 or a country road, like a smaller highway just north, and decided to do the one just north, which would take me through Navajo Nation, the land of the Diné people. And it seemed the right choice to make in terms of just my physical safety. It's illegal to walk on an interstate. And at the same time, it was taking me right into the heart of our collective trauma, and a trauma that I, as a white man, have not had to stand in the flaming fire of. It's the native people of this continent who are experiencing the repercussions of European contact with this continent in a way that the descendants of the European colonizers just simply aren't having to experience. The poverty, the pain. That poverty is mine also. That pain does not belong to the native people. It belongs to me as much as to them, and yet I haven't had to spend my life experiencing that because of my privilege. And so walking into Navajo Nation was the beginning of taking me into the realities of my history, and that was scary because I had no relationships with any native people, and just didn't. It was unknown. It was unknown for me, and the question of like, am I going to be, am I going to be hated for who I am, and will I be safe to walk through this reservation, given that I'm a white man, and well, again, I hope you check the book out, because it's full of stories that humbled me to the realization that hate, even a hatred of myself, is not permitted in this project of learning to heal together the wounds of our past. Hatred, at least for me, hatred is no longer allowed because of the way that I was treated by the Navajo people when I passed through their land. I was treated with respect. I was welcomed into home after home after home. I was welcomed into their ceremonies, a number of their ceremonies that my people did everything they could to eradicate. That I was welcomed into that medicine.
Wow.
So when given such a gift, I was cooked for, I was prayed for. I like the opposite of what I imagined. I was treated as a son of their own. And how to carry that experience now, and not slip into some kind of fantastical ignorance about how to to ground that experience in the bloody soil, which is the context of my meeting with them. That historical trauma is the ether in which I was breathing the same air with them. And so how to remember that, remember where I come from, not and accept the fact that they were accepting me. Because as a white man, something I've struggled with as I come to wrestle with my identity is self-loathing. Is how could I have done this? How could I have shown up in this way historically as a white man? And I guess this is my lot to be in this identity group. And what the heck, what was, and here I am, 2022, like it's my turn to be the white man. And what do I even do with all that? And a big part of my response to that just in myself has been a kind of an aversion to this identity that I've been born into, and even a hatred. And when I walked through the Navajo Nation and was received with love, I learned that it's imperative that I investigate all the dark corners of myself that would respond to myself with anything less than true love. Not pride, not arrogance or superiority, but a love that understands the harms that have been caused and refuses to harm in turn. How do I accept myself in that way? And so the Diné people have been some of my primary teachers in this practice, and I'll just shout out my mentor Daryl Slim, a Navajo man. Yeah, just a profound debt of gratitude to the people I met on my walk in Navajo Nation, and I'll just say too that each and every person I met on my walk, offered a teaching in this realm in some capacity. But that was what I experienced when I walked through the Navajo reservation.
Oh, that's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. You must have had tons of ups and downs along the way. Was there ever a point where you felt you were very close to quitting doing the walk?
Yeah, there were. I mean, every day in some respects, I was encountering everyday discomforts, physical discomforts, and anxieties and fears that challenged my commitment. But because I began having these affirming experiences from the very beginning on day one with people that I could use to reference the validity of what I was doing when I hit a patch of doubt, I was able to keep going. So when I felt lonely, which I did, when I felt afraid, which I did, when I felt, am I crazy for doing this, which I did, I would have these lived experiences to say, okay, maybe, but what about that experience on day one with Pedro and Sergio and Gabrielle? Like that's proof that what I'm doing is worth the cost of experiencing a little doubt, And then what about that experience with Nettie Harlow in Virginia? So I had these lived stories to help me keep going. But yeah, I mean, I think specifically by the time I got to the desert out west, it was August in the Mojave Desert, and just long stretches. And at that point, I was exhausted. I was tired. I was ready to be done. And I still had another month or so to the ocean. And it was a trial, but it felt again it felt like something I ought to keep doing. Keep just one step at a time.
Yeah. Wow. So I live out in Utah, so I know how hot those deserts can be. How did you cross the Rockies? Where was your entry point there?
I crossed the Rockies in New Mexico. So it's the southern section of the range is where I traversed. Yeah, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, kind of that area. And then the Sierra Nevada that was around Death Valley. I went through Death Valley in California. There was 120 degrees or something like that. And then up through Yosemite and then into the Central Valley.
Wow. Well, you mentioned discomforts and, wanting to stop, obviously walking in the heat. Physically speaking, like how were you doing at the time? As you were about to finish, had you gone through any injuries? Did you have to stop for a significant period of time, or was it just kind of knocking out miles every single day?
I never had any significant physical injuries. But I would be tired, very tired at the end of most days. And, I was pushing myself, but not too hard, not to burn out, And so I would rest. I would rest every once in a while, take a day off, take a couple of days off, took a week off, in some of the bigger cities, 2 weeks off at the halfway point.
Yeah, gotcha. So emotionally, as you're approaching the finish, how are you feeling that your trip is about to come to an end? Was there a bit of sadness there? Were you feeling, really happy that you did the whole thing? What were you like emotionally then?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that surprised me was at the end, the walk had become my life, had become what it was that I was identified with. And so the prospect of ending the walk began to feel like death, like it had become so all consuming and so it was me, like I had become like, this is what I did. And it was me. And so the end of it felt like it was going to be the end of me. And for the first time, I think in my life, I came into an awareness of my mortality in a way that somehow transcended the conceptual. It was more than just an idea. It felt like it was happening, and so it was just like, wow, I'm going to die. And I almost went through some, like, a little bit of, I mean, I knew I wasn't going to die, but there was almost bordering on psychotic feeling of, or mystical feeling of, maybe I am going to die. And like, even if I don't die at the end of this walk, like, I am going to die. And holy, like, what, and really coming into an awareness of that, which then began to, just give life and birth all of these profound gratitudes of, wow, if I really was going to die next week, what would it be like for me to experience this coffee and honey bun that I just bought at the gas station? If this were like my last ever honey bun and coffee, you know what I mean? Like, if this is the last time I was ever going to get to talk to this person I love, like, how would that change how I'm experiencing this conversation? And so the end of the walk really catalyzed an awareness of my mortality. And so the final day at the ocean was a kind of death, like it was. And I think many rites of passage and initiations are designed to replicate or sort of approximate the experience of physical death, so as to bring the initiate into a closer relationship with who they really are as mortal beings, and as awareness itself. And so I sort of stumbled into an experience that gave me that gave me an experience of who I am as a mortal being, and who I am as not an immortal being, but as someone who isn't defined by the fact that my body will experience a physical death.
Sure. Yeah. As much as the ego does not like to contemplate that, it seems like the hero's journey, always comes back to the same kind of thing. There's a foe that's conquered. The hero goes out and conquers the foe, and then he's got to come back. He's got to return, and then he needs to share his learning, share his knowledge with the rest of the community. So as you came back, I first want to know: was there a bit of sadness or lingering depression from that death of that experience? And then secondly, when did you? I mean, I'm sure you knew you were going to put this out into some kind of content afterwards, but when did you know you were going to write a book and really focus on this as your concept?
I think in the moment at the end, there was nothing but profound gratitude for my life, for this walk, for the people who are a part of it, for this earth, for the pain that people go through, that I go through, just all of it. There was this sort of, this like orgasmic experience of gratitude just permeating every cell of me. And so that was sort of like the local forecast. The regional forecast, as the days and months continued to pass on, I think in the months and even years after the walk finished, I was quickened and clarified by the conviction to share some of what I had experienced, um, as a way of continuing to integrate that experience for myself, and also give other people a window into what I found out was possible for me, at least. And so that conviction kind of carried me for several years after the walk. And I would say it's only been in recent years that it's been about 10 years since I began the walk. And I would say it's only been in recent years that I have felt that postpartum depression, that kind of contraction after the expansion, which I think is like the winter season. It's what comes before the springtime in the cycle. And so I think I'm cycling toward whatever my next walk might be, metaphorical walk might be. There's sort of, I would say, like, now is a time in which I'm experiencing some tenderness, and vulnerability around, all right, now that I've done justice to this experience, I made this beautiful radio piece and wrote this book that I'm proud of, and have shared that with many schools, high schools, colleges, libraries. I've toured it. I've done everything I can to give it its wings, and off she flies. And now what? Now who? And so I would say you catch me at a moment in my life where I'm looking ahead, but not wanting to rush out of the feeling of listlessness and just tenderness that can come after a massive birth.
Yeah. Wow. Love that. Talking about the concept in your book of listening, let's not get too myopic and just talk about the walk itself. Let's talk about your entire life. What things have you learned about listening, and how have you gotten better as a listener over time?
Mm, mm. Yeah, thank you for the question. And there's so much here. This is a big part of what I've been doing in the years since, is sort of using my walk as a way to open up a conversation about listening, and a particular kind of listening I call trustworthy listening, which is less concerned with right and wrong and more concerned in just pure witnessing, pure receiving, not agreeing necessarily, but receiving and acknowledging and accepting the existence of what's being listened to. So, well, for one, I think from listening, I've learned there's I can only listen to you which is to say, accept you, maybe not agree with you, but listen to you. Like I hear you, I see you, I feel you, I witness you, I make contact with you. Um, I'm listening to you. In that way, I can only listen to you to the extent that I've listened to myself and to those wounds inside my own mind and heart that would manifest as judgments of you if I've left those wounds unattended. So the places where I am still hurting and in pain in myself is often the place where I judge others and or hate others or just refuse to be with others. And listening is the practice of being with. So in order to listen trustworthily, in order to really listen, not so that I can win the argument or get what I want, but listen so that I can be with you, simply be with you, and endeavor to celebrate who you are and your place of belonging here. In order to be with you in that way, listen to you in that way, listen with you in that way, I need to be in an active listening relationship with my own pain. And so pain, I think, is actually at the center of our ability to listen. And where we haven't yet healed in ourselves is going to be where we can't yet meet other people in what they're working through, and instead recoil away from them in judgment or in any of the manifestations of separation that we can imagine are real.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's the beginning.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. What is it about walking and listening together specifically that is so powerful? I'd love to hear that answered in your own words. I totally agree with you. My wife and I walk every single morning, and we always talk and have our most profound talks when we're out walking. Why, in your opinion, are those things matched up so well?
Mm. It was sort of an accidental pairing for me. Like it wasn't an intentional thing. I just knew that I needed I needed some kind of physical challenge, and walking was the one that I could afford just financially, and then listening was clear because I knew that I didn't know so much, and listening seemed the way to learn more. And then you're right, they're an incredible pairing, and I kind of stumbled into that, and I think partially for me it was a good pairing because it's hard to listen. Basically, it's hard to really listen and to not recoil away or to shut down or to lash out. It's hard. It's difficult to stay in that posture of listening, even when what you're listening to in your own mind or in someone else is violent or difficult to bear. How do you stay in that posture? It's hard. It takes training. And so for me, the walking was a really helpful way to just bring me, just feel my body come out of the mind, like not, or let my mind process, literally by just walking over the face of the earth. And it humbled me, like walking through a desert in the summer, walking through the South in the winter, not having walking in this particular way, this sort of pilgrimage kind of way, is humbled me to the realization that I am forever and always in a state of perpetual need. I need the next breath of air. I need the next meal, and my money and my privilege and my distractions can make it easy for me to forget that at all times I'm existing in a state of need in which my needs are by and large getting met. And when those needs are either not met, like I don't get a shower that night, or I don't find someone to ask permission to camp out, I begin to feel what it feels like to to be a little closer to the edge. And that put me into a state of openness and humility that is also an essential aspect of listening. So yeah, and then just connection to the earth, like it comes back to the earth. Like the earth alone is what can process all our trauma. The earth alone is who can help us navigate these challenges that we're experiencing right now, and to call on the earth to be conscious of the footsteps that I'm taking on this body of creation, and cultivating an awareness of that, I think helped me listen a little more expansively than my limited human self is capable of.
You mentioned facing fear. When you're working with somebody who is actively trying to become a better listener, what are some practical tips that you tell that person so that they can develop these skills over time and become a better listener?
It's a beautiful question. Thank you. Beautiful. I'm just like feeling the earnestness, like feeling your earnestness, my earnestness, anyone who's endeavoring to really actually experience whatever it might take to get us to a place where we're not missing what's right in front of us, And so first I would just say to celebrate that, like celebrate for whoever's listening and is interested in what I might have to say in response to this question. I would say locate and identify your sincerity and celebrate that, like feel your earnestness, to want to understand something, want to understand yourself, want to be in a relationship. It's that sincere impulse that is going to be just feel that, follow that, not to get anywhere else or get something else, even the ability to listen, but just to be in relationship with that, because I think that's the beginning of your authentic, or maybe not the beginning of, but just that's your authenticity. So just to feel your authenticity, which is so hammered out of most of us, to find, to isolate, to locate your authentic expression. You can call it your soul, your heart, your true self, who you really are. And so any place where you can begin to feel that sincerity, and then just track that, feel that, and really just build a relationship with that, which is what my walk was. That my walk was more than anything else the beginning of my relationship with myself. It was I was the one who was with me every step of the way. I was the one who was there when fear was present, when ecstasy was present. Fear wasn't there the whole time. Ecstasy wasn't there the whole time, but I was there the whole time, learning how to be my own guardian and caretaker and lover and husband and friend. And so I think that would be the main thing to say, is just may the listening begin with you in your own self, your own reclamation of who you are, and your own marriage with yourself. And a marriage is full of challenges and complications and joys and teachings and learnings. And that's the source. And then the listening that you're then able to do with others is almost incidental to the listening that you're doing with yourself. It's not a narcissistic thing. It's a selfish thing in the best kind of way. When in my opinion, when I'm being self-centered, in the sense of centering my attention in the self that I truly am, not the self that I was conditioned to be or to think myself to be, but who I truly am, this soul embodied in a heart, this sensitive human being, when I've located and then centered that self, not in a position of superiority, but just in a position of knowing who I am, then from that place, then the listening happens on its own. The listening to others is a natural byproduct of becoming listening for yourself.
Mm. Well, I know you've talked about this in the past, and I'm so glad that you have. I really love addressing this topic. And you just mentioned relationships. And so, for somebody that wants to embrace more of their masculine energy, why is listening so important to do that?
Mm. Love the question. I'm just steeping in it for a moment. Well, I think I would first say that in courting any energy, whether it's masculine or feminine or dark or light, or however you'd want to describe a certain kind of energy that you're interested in cultivating, it's like approaching someone to become your friend, and so there's a courtship involved. There's a who are you, and tell me about who you are. And I'm not going to be able to get to know anything at all about you if I'm not able to really witness you and observe you and listen to you. And so for me, at least, the depth of my relationships is determined by the depth of my listening. And I'm going to get to learn more about you, Casey, or you, Andrew, or you, masculine energy, if I am able to render myself open to whatever it is I'm proposing to know. And so when it comes to masculinity and masculine energy and your own unique embodiment as a self-identifying man, whoever you are, whoever's listening, for me, it's listening, a listening first approach, or a listening based approach to the formation of an identity is the most exciting way to build an identity that's authentic to who you actually are. And so not to impose upon yourself whatever it is you think masculine energy is. Say, oh, masculine energy is, it's like, it's this or it's that, or it's but to say, actually, no, what if I don't know who you are? What if I don't know who you are, masculine energy? And I don't have the easy out of a sort of a quick answer to what that is. What if I actually don't know? Well, it means that I have to listen to find out. And it's in that listening relationship that something authentic can be learned, not something that I learned in a classroom or was transmitted to me from someone else's learning, but because I listened to it, because I didn't know, because I chose not to know what it was, and instead said, okay, let me listen so as to make myself open and available to whatever masculine energy might be. Then there's the chance that it can be uniquely and authentically embodied. So I don't know what masculine energy is for anyone other than myself. And I'm only knowing what it is by the slow and delicate and earnest work of listening, of staying in the question, rather than trying to answer it.
Yeah, great answer. I found it in the way that, my partner would talk about things that would happen in her day, and I would just want to step in and fix everything without fully listening to what she was feeling and saying. And she just really needed somebody to listen to the story, not necessarily, go punch her coworker or try to leave a negative review at a place that made her wait 20 extra minutes or something. You know what I mean? Like, true listening is so much more space for anything that somebody could bring up, and it's not necessarily trying to make everything right. It's just the act of doing it itself is so powerful and important. I love,
and then I'll just say just briefly there is what someone else brings to the table of a conversation is going to trigger and evoke different things in us that needs our listening. So whatever it was your partner shared with you that triggers the anger or the intensity, Like, that's what you get to listen to. And attempting to fix someone else's path is not only to sort of get involved with work that's not our own, but to miss out on the opportunity to listen to something deeper inside your own self and get to know you a little bit better, you know?
Yeah, great point. Man, this has been such an awesome conversation. I love learning about your journey and your, learnings ever since. If you could distill down one simple tip to leave with the listener today, what would that be from this conversation?
Cherish yourself.
That's great advice. That's a great way to close this conversation. Andrew, where would you like people to go to find you, to find your book, and to find your work?
You can go to livingtolisten.com. It's my website, and there's a newsletter there you can sign up for. And yeah, otherwise email me with any questions or inquiries. And Casey, thank you so much for your listening and your care.
Absolutely. Andrew Forsthoefel, author of Walking to Listen. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be able to hear you and listen to you and your stories, and just realize how important it is to relate to one another, especially in times when we feel like we are getting a little bit more divided, but to remember that we do have commonality, and when we can be authentic with the people around us, we can really appreciate those relationships so much better. So thank you so very much for everything that you've done, for having the courage to go out on this journey, and then the strength to share it with the rest of us. We're so grateful for you and for your journey and your time today with us on our show. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, Casey, so much.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.